Hello ND narrator. My name is David. I am 42 years old, born and raised in Tel Aviv, Israel. I have been a journalist for almost 2 decades. I grew up in a middle-class Jewish family in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other. My father worked in banking and my mother taught literature in a local high school. I remember my childhood as busy with school, synagogue, and long summer days at the beach. Our home was traditional but not extreme in religious practice. We kept the main Jewish holidays, followed the kosher rules, and attended synagogue regularly, especially on Shabbat. I learned from a young age that being Jewish was not just about religion, but also about history, identity, and survival. The stories of my grandparents who lived through the Holocaust and later helped build the young state of Israel were told to us like sacred lessons. From the time I was a boy, my parents made sure I understood the basics of our faith. I learned the Torah portions for my bar mitzvah at age 13 and could recite many of the prayers by heart. Yet, in Israel, faith often blends with culture and not everyone practices in the same way. Some are deeply religious, others more secular, but nearly all share the same view about Jesus. He is not the Messiah. In my education, this was presented as a fact. The rabbis explained that the Messiah will bring lasting peace to the world, gather all Jews back to Israel, and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Since these things had not happened, Jesus could not be the one. That belief was fixed in my mind for most of my life. Christians saw him differently, but in our eyes, that was their religion, not ours. As I grew older, my focus turned to storytelling and writing. I studied communications at university in Jerusalem, and after graduating, I joined a small local newspaper. At first, I covered community events and local politics, but over the years, my work grew into investigative journalism. I learned to follow stories wherever they led, sometimes to tense situations in border areas or refugee camps. My passion for the truth often meant traveling to places most people avoided. This is how my sister and I became connected in our careers, though she took things to another level entirely. If I was cautious, she was fearless. If I planned every detail, she followed her instincts. She was always drawn to danger. My sister's name is Rachel. She is 3 years younger than me, but she has always seemed bolder and more determined. She studied journalism in the United States and stayed there for several years after graduation, working for various news outlets. Living in America gave her a second passport, a U.S. passport, which became her ticket to stories that would have been impossible for her to reach as an Israeli. It opened doors to countries that refused to admit Israeli citizens. She knew exactly what she was doing and she loved the challenge. While I worked on reports inside Israel or in neighboring countries where I could travel safely with my Israeli passport, Rachel was slipping into places like Algeria, Lebanon, and even Iran. It's hard to explain to people outside our region how dangerous that is for someone born in Israel. There are countries where our nationality is not just unwelcome, it is considered an enemy identity. Even if you are a journalist, it doesn't matter. The moment you present an Israeli passport in certain places, you risk arrest or worse. That's why Rachel's American citizenship made her work possible. She would enter those countries without anyone knowing she was Israeli by birth. She didn't lie in her reports, but she never revealed her personal background either. To her, it was about getting the story. To me, it was about playing with fire. Rachel and I often argued about her travel plans. I would warn her that the risk was too high, that no story was worth her life. She would laugh and say, "David, danger is where the truth hides. If we don't go, the lies win." That was her nature, a mixture of courage, stubbornness, and a deep belief in the role of a journalist as a witness to the world. She had already been to places like Yemen, Syria, and Libya, returning each time with photos, interviews, and stories that shocked her editors. These were not tourist trips. She would stay with local families, eat what they ate, and walk the streets to understand their lives. She blended in as much as possible, careful never to draw attention, but I knew every trip could be the one that went wrong. In our conversations, I often reminded her of the limits Israelis face, not just because of politics but because of history. The hostility toward Israel in some countries is more than political disagreement, it is rooted in decades of conflict. I didn't need to explain this to her, she understood it well. But Rachel believed that journalism was about crossing those lines, not avoiding them. She once told me, if we only tell the stories from places that are safe, we miss the truth about what's really happening in the world. It was hard to argue with her logic even though I feared for her safety. Our parents tried to stay out of our debates, though I could tell they worried too. My mother would light an extra candle when Rachel was abroad, and my father would follow foreign news closely until she came home. Over the years, Rachel built a reputation for her work in conflict zones. Editors trusted her because she always delivered, no matter how hard the conditions. She had reported on famine in Yemen, street protests in Lebanon, and secretive militia groups in Syria. Each trip seemed to make her bolder. She would talk about her experiences as if they were just another day in the office, but I could see the toll it took on her. She hid it well, yet I noticed the way her eyes would sometimes cloud over when describing certain events. I respected her bravery, but I also knew bravery had limits. There are lines that, once crossed, leave no way back. Despite her growing list of dangerous assignments, Rachel had always managed to return unharmed. That, I think, gave her a sense of invincibility. She started to speak of going to places most journalists avoided entirely, not just because of political danger but because the governments there were completely closed to outside reporting. She had been talking for months about wanting to see North Korea for herself. She said it was the last true black box country, where the outside world only saw what the regime wanted to show. She believed that with her American passport, she could slip in, move carefully, and report what she saw. I told her she was chasing a shadow and risking too much. But Rachel was already thinking about flights and visas. She was certain she could manage it, just like she had in every other country before. In truth, her confidence was built on years of getting away with it. From Bangladesh to Brunei, from Malaysia to Pakistan, she had entered and left without incident. It made her believe the same would happen in North Korea. She had covered dangerous regimes before and thought this would be no different. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was different, that she was walking into a trap she couldn't see. But when I voiced this, she smiled and told me, "David, fear is the enemy of truth. If I let it guide me, I'd still be writing about weather forecasts in Tel Aviv." Her words were sharp, but I knew they came from her passion for her work, not from any lack of love for me. That was Rachel, fearless, stubborn, and always chasing the story the rest of us were too afraid to touch. Looking back, those conversations feel like warnings I didn't know how to make her hear. To me, her assignments had become almost a routine, each one starting with an email or call to say she was leaving, followed by days or weeks of silence, and ending with her safe return and a story in print. It was dangerous, yes, but it was the life she had chosen. I had stopped trying to change her mind. Instead, I learned to wait, to watch the news with a quiet heart, and to pray, in the Jewish way I had always known, for her safe return. I never imagined that one of those trips would be different. I never imagined that a day would come when I would have to look beyond everything I had been taught about God and reach for help in a place I had never believed it could be found. When Rachel first mentioned North Korea seriously, I thought it was another one of her big ideas that might fade with time. She had talked about it before, always in passing, calling it the last wall standing against the free press. This time felt different. She wasn't just curious, she was determined. She had already contacted a travel agency in China that specialized in organizing trips to North Korea for foreigners. She explained that Americans were still allowed to enter through certain guided tours, as long as they followed strict rules. The thought of my sister walking the streets of Pyongyang under the watchful eyes of state guides filled me with unease. To her, it was an opportunity to see the truth for herself. To me, it was walking willingly into a place designed to keep outsiders blind and silent. I asked her over coffee one afternoon why this story was worth more than her safety. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and said, "David, no one gets the full picture of North Korea. Every image you see, every report is filtered by their government. What's really happening there? How do people live? What do they fear? Someone has to see it with their own eyes." I told her it was too risky, that journalists had been detained before, and some never returned home the same. She reminded me that she was an American citizen and that the worst that could happen was being sent back. I didn't believe it was that simple. In my mind, there were too many stories of travelers who went in and never walked out freely again. Rachel began preparing like she always did before a dangerous trip. She read every piece of writing she could find about North Korea, watched documentaries, and even practiced small gestures and phrases she thought might help her blend in. She explained that in North Korea, you can't just wander around or speak freely to strangers. Every step is planned by your government guide, and every hotel is monitored. It's like living inside a movie set, she told me, but I'll be watching for what's behind the set. I didn't like the way she said it, as though she believed she could move unseen. In places like that, I knew the watchers were always ahead of you. Still, her confidence was unshakable. As her departure date approached, the tension between us grew. I called her the night before she was scheduled to leave for Beijing, which would be her entry point into North Korea. I tried once more to make her reconsider. "Rachel," I said, "this isn't Syria or Lebanon. This is a country where even the smallest mistake can make you a prisoner. If something goes wrong, no one will be able to help you." She was quiet for a moment, then replied softly, "David, you worry because you love me. I know the risks. I'm not going in blind. But if I don't take this chance, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Her voice was calm, steady, the same voice she used when she had already made up her mind. Rachel left Israel the next morning and flew to China without incident. She sent me a brief message when she landed in Beijing, letting me know she was safe. From there, she would meet the tour organizers who would arrange her flight into Pyongyang. The rules were clear. She could not bring any religious material, books critical of the North Korean government, or electronic devices not approved by the guides. She could take photos, but only of what they allowed. She could ask questions, but only if they were acceptable to the government officials accompanying her. I thought about how unnatural that would be for someone like her, a journalist trained to dig for the truth, now forced to act as though she saw nothing beyond the official story. The last message I received from her before she crossed into North Korea was short and lighthearted. "Going off the map for a few days. Don't panic. I'll be fine." I stared at those words on my phone, wishing I could believe them. I tried to go about my own work, but the thought of her in that tightly controlled, isolated country stayed with me. Every report I had ever read about North Korea echoed in my mind, the stories of harsh prison camps, public displays of loyalty to the regime, and the constant surveillance that made privacy impossible. I told myself she had been in dangerous places before and always found her way home, but something about this felt different. Days passed with no word from Rachel, which was expected since communication out of North Korea is limited. Still, I counted each day, waiting for her to reappear online or call from Beijing once the tour was over. On the 5th day, I was at my desk working on an article when my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. It was from a fellow journalist she had met in China. His short note made my stomach tighten. "David, I think Rachel's been detained. Call me." I immediately stepped away from my desk and dialed the number. The man explained that the rest of the tour group had returned to Beijing without her. The guides told them she was being questioned and would follow later. No one knew why. Panic rose in me as I asked every question I could think of. Had she broken a rule? Said something wrong? Tried to photograph something forbidden? The man didn't know. All he could tell me was that she hadn't boarded the plane with the others and the North Korean officials weren't giving details. My mind went to the worst possibilities. I had read about Otto Warmbier, the American student who was accused of stealing a propaganda poster in 2016 and was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. He returned to the US in a coma and died shortly after. The thought that my sister could be facing a similar fate made it hard to breathe. I tried to reach Rachel directly, but of course there was no response. Calls and messages went unanswered. The silence felt heavier with each passing hour. I contacted the Israeli Foreign Ministry, but they were quick to remind me that Israel has no diplomatic relations with North Korea. Any help would have to come through third parties. I reached out to the US Embassy in Beijing, hoping her American passport would make a difference. The official I spoke with was polite but cautious. "We're aware of the situation and gathering information," he said, but I could hear in his voice that there were limits to what they could do. That night I barely slept. I sat in my living room, the news playing in the background, but I wasn't listening. I kept imagining Rachel in some dark room, being interrogated for hours. I pictured her refusing to lie, refusing to betray her principles, and I feared that her courage might only make things worse for her in a place like that. I replayed our last conversation in my head, wishing I had tried harder to stop her. But Rachel was never someone you could stop once her mind was set. All I could do now was wait, and waiting felt like watching her slip further into danger I couldn't reach. The following morning, I received a brief email from an unknown address. It simply read, "Rachel has been arrested for activities hostile to the state. She will be tried according to our laws." There was no signature, no official letterhead, nothing but those words. My hands shook as I read them over and over, trying to process what they meant. Hostile to the state? In North Korea, that could mean anything: taking the wrong photo, asking the wrong question, speaking to the wrong person. I knew then that this wasn't going to be a misunderstanding they cleared up in a few hours. This was serious, and I had no idea how far it would go. By the end of that day, word of her arrest had reached a small circle of journalists I knew personally. Some of them had contacts in Beijing and had heard whispers about an American being held in Pyongyang. They reached out to me quietly, speaking in guarded tones, unsure of the details but certain the situation was serious. No one wanted to put anything in writing that could make matters worse. I sat at my desk staring at a photo of her on my phone, her familiar smile lighting up the frame, and I felt powerless. This wasn't just another dangerous assignment. This was the one that had crossed the line from risk to catastrophe. And deep down, I knew that from this point on, nothing about the situation, or my life, would be the same. The first thing I did the next morning was call the Israeli Foreign Ministry again. I explained in detail who my sister was, her dual citizenship, and what I had learned about her detention. The official on the line listened politely, taking notes, but his tone remained cautious. "David, you must understand," he said, "Israel has no diplomatic relations with North Korea. We cannot send anyone there, and we have no embassy to speak on her behalf. Any communication would have to go through another country, likely Sweden, which represents U.S. interests in Pyongyang." His words felt like a door closing in my face. I pressed him for alternatives, asking if there was anything at all they could do, but he only repeated that their hands were tied. I ended the call with a heavy heart, realizing my own government could offer nothing more than sympathy from a distance. After that, I turned to the U.S. side, hoping her American citizenship would carry more weight. I contacted the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv first, but they redirected me to their office in Beijing, which handles issues involving North Korea. Reaching the right person was an exhausting process of transfers, voicemails, and repeated explanations of the situation. When I finally spoke to a consular officer, his voice was professional but distant. He confirmed they were aware of the case but warned that communication with North Korean authorities was extremely limited. "We will try to establish contact and verify her condition," he said, "but these matters can take time, and there is no guarantee of access." Hearing the word guarantee replaced by no guarantee sent a wave of dread through me. Time was not something I felt we had. Every day she was in their custody was a day something could go horribly wrong. The embassy asked me for copies of Rachel's identification documents, travel itinerary, and any recent photos I had. I sent them everything within the hour, scanning her passports, attaching her most recent pictures, and even forwarding a copy of her planned schedule in North Korea that she had shared before leaving. I hoped this would make it easier for them to find her, but I sensed the same wall of caution in every email and phone call. They spoke as if the case was already moving into a slow, bureaucratic rhythm. I wanted urgency, but urgency wasn't in their language. Every official conversation ended with some version of, "We will update you when we have information," which meant I had no control over when or if news would come. As the hours turned into days, I started reaching out to anyone I thought might have influence. Former colleagues who now worked for larger media organizations, human rights groups, even diplomats I had met during past reporting assignments. Some responded with concern, others with cautious advice. A few admitted they had no connections that could help in North Korea. It became clear to me how isolated that country truly is, and how even powerful nations struggle to get answers from its leaders. The more I learned, the more I realized Rachel's situation wasn't just dangerous. It was potentially unchangeable without something extraordinary happening. I felt as though I was standing on the edge of a cliff, watching her fall, but with no rope to throw down. At night, I found myself reading every article I could about foreigners detained in North Korea. That's when I came across the detailed account of Otto Warmbier again. I had read about his case when it first happened, but now, every detail hit me harder. He was just 21 years old, accused of trying to steal a propaganda poster from his hotel. For that, he was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. When he was finally released and returned to the US, he was in a coma and he died days later. I remember staring at the screen, my chest tightening, thinking, this is the kind of fate my sister could be facing. The thought stayed with me, haunting me through every silent hour that passed without news. I tried to keep my parents informed, though I filtered what I told them. They were already deeply worried, and I didn't want to crush what hope they had. Still, they could hear the tension in my voice. My mother asked if I thought she would be home soon, and I couldn't bring myself to answer directly. My father, always the realist, simply said, "This will take more than politics to fix." I knew he was right. It was becoming clearer every day that neither the Israeli nor the US government was going to mount a dramatic rescue. At best, they would negotiate slowly, cautiously, and within the limits North Korea allowed. At worst, they would wait until it was too late. Every time I called the embassy in Beijing for updates, I felt my patience were thinner. The officers were polite, but their words were always measured. "We are in contact with Swedish intermediaries," they would say, or "We have requested information on her condition." When I asked if they had spoken to Rachel directly, the answer was always no. It was like trying to see through a wall made of stone. There was no way to know what was on the other side. The absence of real information was its own form of torture. My mind filled in the blanks with the worst possibilities, and I had no way to prove myself wrong. Friends and colleagues began suggesting that I use the media to put pressure on the situation. They thought public attention could force the governments to act more decisively. But I hesitated. I knew that in some cases public campaigns had backfired, making the detaining country more defensive and less willing to cooperate. The last thing I wanted was to make Rachel's captors angry. Every move felt like a gamble, and I didn't know which risks were worth taking. In the end, I decided to hold back, keeping the matter within private channels as much as possible. It was a difficult choice, but I believed silence might be safer for her than headlines. The days began to blend into one another, each marked by the same pattern. Checking my phone the moment I woke up, calling the embassy, sending more emails, and waiting for replies that carried no real progress. My own work suffered. I found it hard to focus on assignments, my thoughts constantly drifting to images of Rachel in some dimly lit room, answering questions she couldn't answer, wondering if anyone was coming for her. I had always been the older brother, the one she could lean on, but now I felt completely powerless. That helplessness was like a weight I carried everywhere. One evening, after a particularly frustrating call with an official who told me they were still awaiting a response from Pyongyang, I sat in the dark with my laptop open, staring at the blank screen. I thought about all the layers between me and my sister, political, geographic, and human, and how impossible it seemed to break through them. I also thought about the clock that was quietly ticking, the unseen countdown that had begun the moment she was taken. In places like North Korea, time doesn't heal, it deepens the danger. I could feel that reality pressing in on me, and it left me with a sinking certainty. If the people in power would not move quickly, I had to find another way. I sat in my apartment with the curtains drawn, staring at my phone. Another day had passed without a single piece of real news about Rachel. I had spoken to officials, sent documents, and written emails until my fingers ached, yet I was no closer to bringing her home. The quiet of the room pressed against me like a physical weight. My thoughts became darker with each hour. I imagined her in a cold cell, wondering if I had given up on her. The loneliness was overwhelming. I had friends, but none could help. I had family, but they were just as powerless. I was a journalist who had always believed in evidence, logic, and reason was telling me there was nothing left to do. That thought terrified me more than anything else. As the hours turned into night, I found myself pacing back and forth, the floor creaking under my steps. I thought about my upbringing, about the Jewish prayers I had learned as a boy. I had recited them at holidays and in times of family crisis. But over the years, my faith had become something distant, almost ceremonial. Jesus had never been a figure I considered in my life. To me, he was a figure for Christians, someone outside of our traditions, someone whose name came up in debates, not in prayers. Yet now, as I felt the walls closing in, I realized that tradition and logic had both brought me to the same place, a dead end. I stopped pacing and sat down again, my elbows on my knees, my hands covering my face. I thought about the moments in life when I had been most desperate, and I realized nothing compared to this. I didn't know where Rachel was or what was happening to her, and I had no way to reach her. The governments had made their positions clear. The channels were slow. The danger was real. In that silence, an idea formed in my mind, a strange, uncomfortable idea. What if I prayed to Jesus? The thought startled me. It went against everything I had grown up believing, against the way I had been taught to see faith. But it also felt like the only thing I had not tried. For a few minutes, I fought the thought. My mind argued with itself, listing all the reasons it didn't make sense. I wasn't a Christian. I didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. And yet, my heart pushed back with a simpler truth. I loved my sister and I was willing to try anything to save her. The arguments in my head started to fade, replaced by an image of her face, smiling in better times, her eyes bright with life. I thought about losing that light forever and something in me broke. Pride, logic, tradition. None of them mattered in that moment. What mattered was doing whatever I could to bring her home. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I didn't know the right words and I didn't know how Christians were supposed to pray, but I knew how to speak from the heart. Jesus, I said quietly, almost afraid someone might hear, I don't know you. I've never believed in you. But they say you can save. They say you listen. My voice shook as I continued. If you bring Rachel home, if you get her out of that place alive, I will give you my life. I will follow you. I will tell people what you did for me. The words came slowly, each one heavier than the last, because I knew I was making a promise that would change everything. When I opened my eyes, the room felt the same, still dark, still silent. I didn't feel lightning strike or hear a voice from the sky, but something inside me shifted. It was small, like a faint warmth in the center of my chest, but it was enough to keep me from collapsing under the weight of fear. I realized that, for the first time since Rachel's arrest, I had done something that felt new. I had spoken to someone who wasn't a government official, a journalist, or a friend. I had spoken to someone I couldn't see or measure, but who might be able to do what I could not. That night, I lay in bed with my eyes open, replaying the prayer in my mind. It felt strange, even unnatural, but it also carried a sense of relief. I had made a vow, and in doing so, I had placed the situation in hands beyond mine. Of course, the doubt was still there. I kept thinking, what if nothing changes? What if I never hear from her again? But alongside those questions was a quiet, stubborn hope. It was the first hope I had felt in days, and it kept me from drowning in the helplessness that had been swallowing me. Over the next few days, I repeated the prayer. Sometimes it was in the morning before I made my calls. Sometimes it was late at night when the fear returned. I spoke to Jesus as if he could hear me in the room, explaining how much Rachel meant to me, how much I needed her safe. I didn't use formal words. I didn't try to sound religious. I spoke like a brother talking to a friend, even if that friend was someone I had ignored my whole life. And each time, the same quiet strength returned, not loud or dramatic, but steady enough to keep me moving forward. I didn't tell anyone about what I had done. My parents wouldn't understand, and my friends in Israel might think I had lost my mind. I kept it to myself, guarding it like something fragile. Part of me was still afraid it wouldn't work, and I didn't want to face the questions or the judgments. But another part of me felt that keeping it private made it more real, like a secret agreement between me and Jesus that no one else could interfere with. As the days passed, I began to notice small changes in myself. The constant knot in my stomach loosened slightly. My voice was steadier when I called the embassy. I still felt the urgency, but it was no longer mixed with the same level of panic. I started to believe, at least a little, that something could shift. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't try to. All I knew was that my vow had given me a strange kind of courage. Not the kind that erases fear, but the kind that keeps you walking forward despite it. In those quiet moments, I thought about what my promise meant. I had said I would give Jesus my life if he saved Rachel. That wasn't a small thing. It meant more than words. I didn't know yet what following him would look like for me, but I knew it would require changes I had never imagined making. I had lived most of my life focused on facts, stories, and deadlines, not on faith. But if he answered this prayer, I knew I would have to keep my word, no matter how much it changed my world. By the end of that week, my conversations with officials still felt like circles, but something in me had shifted. I had stopped relying entirely on them for the outcome. Yes, I still made calls, sent emails, and pushed for updates, but I no longer saw them as my only hope. I had placed my sister's fate in someone else's hands, and for the first time since her arrest, I felt like there was a path, invisible, yes, but still a path, leading us forward. I didn't know where it would take us, but I knew I was ready to follow it. That night, I went to bed later than usual. My mind had been busy all day, replaying my vow to Jesus and wondering what it might mean for the future. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the street lamp outside my window. I lay on my side, staring at the shadows on the wall until my eyelids grew heavy. I didn't expect anything unusual to happen. I simply closed my eyes and let the tiredness pull me under. But as soon as sleep came, I found myself standing somewhere I had never been before. A place that felt both strange and familiar, like stepping into a memory that didn't belong to me. The ground beneath my feet was smooth, almost like glass, and a soft light filled the air, though I couldn't see its source. At first, I thought I was alone. I turned my head slowly, trying to make sense of where I was. The space stretched endlessly in every direction, yet there was no sky, no sun, no horizon. It was as if I was inside a light that had no walls. Then I heard footsteps. They were slow, steady, and heavy, but not threatening. My eyes followed the sound, and that's when I saw him. Jesus. I didn't need anyone to tell me it was him. I had seen paintings and images before, but this was different. He wasn't glowing like in the pictures I'd seen, yet his presence was brighter than anything around him. His eyes met mine, and in that instant I felt something deep inside me give way. A wall I didn't even know I had was gone. He walked toward me with a purpose. Every step he took felt like it carried weight far beyond the physical. When he stood in front of me, he didn't speak at first. Instead, he looked straight into my eyes, and I felt as if he could see every part of me, every doubt, every fear, every moment of pride, every time I had failed someone I loved. Yet there was no condemnation in his gaze. It was like standing in the middle of a storm and realizing you were safe. I wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth stayed shut, my thoughts frozen under the weight of that moment. Then, without warning, he reached out his hand toward me. I hesitated, unsure if I should take it. But before I could decide, he took hold of my wrist and pulled me forward. It wasn't a violent pull, but it was firm, unstoppable, like the pull of a strong current in the ocean. My feet moved without my control. The light around us seemed to grow, and suddenly I realized we were walking towards something, or someone. My heart pounded in my chest as the shape ahead became clearer. It was a figure, small and still. When we got closer, my breath caught in my throat. It was Rachel. She was kneeling, her head bowed, her clothes torn, but she was alive. My chest felt like it might burst from the mix of relief and disbelief. Jesus didn't speak. He simply reached down, took Rachel by the arm, and lifted her to her feet. She looked at him, then at me, and her eyes filled with tears. Before I could say anything, he turned to me and placed her hand into mine. The moment her hand touched mine, warmth spread through my body. It wasn't like heat from the sun or a fire. It was deeper, reaching into places inside me I didn't know existed. I looked at Jesus again, trying to find words, but my throat was too tight. His eyes held mine for a moment longer, then he let go and stepped back. Rachel's grip tightened on my hand as if she was afraid to let go. I wanted to pull her into my arms, but I couldn't move. Everything around us began to fade. The light, the ground, even the air seemed to dissolve. The last thing I saw was his face, calm and steady, watching me as if to say, "You asked." I heard. Then the light disappeared completely, and I felt myself falling backward into darkness. My heart raced, and for a moment I thought I was waking up. But before I could open my eyes, I heard his voice for the first time. It wasn't loud, yet it filled every part of me. He said, "Trust me." When I opened my eyes, my room was still dark. The street lamp's glow was in the same place it had been when I fell asleep. For a few seconds, I lay still, my breathing uneven, my mind trying to hold on to every detail of what I had just seen. It felt more real than any dream I had ever experienced. My hands were trembling, and I realized I was still gripping the sheets as if I had been holding on to Rachel. I sat up slowly, my heart still pounding. I didn't know what the dream meant exactly, but I knew it wasn't random. It was too vivid, too clear, too purposeful to be the work of my imagination. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat there, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. The image of Jesus taking my wrist, pulling me forward, and handing me Rachel was burned into my mind. I could still feel the weight of her hand in mine, the warmth that had filled me, the look in his eyes. It wasn't like the religious images I had grown up ignoring. It wasn't art. It wasn't theory. It was him. And he had given me a message without a single speech, that he was able, and that my sister's life was in his hands now. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. The constant pressure that had been sitting there since her arrest was gone. It wasn't because I had new information about her case, or because the governments had changed their minds. Nothing in the physical world had shifted yet. But inside me, there was a calm I hadn't known in years. It was as if the dream had placed a foundation under my feet, one that no official statement or news report could shake. I didn't understand how it worked, and I didn't need to. I knew what I had seen, and I knew who had shown it to me. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands still a little unsteady. As I drank, I thought about what would come next. The situation was still dangerous. Rachel was still far from home. But I no longer felt like I was standing alone in a storm with no shelter. I felt like I was walking with someone who already knew the outcome. That thought settled into me like a seed planted deep in the soil, unseen but alive. I couldn't stop the small smile that formed on my face even in the dark. I didn't know when or how it would happen, but I knew something had changed. I went back to bed and lay down again, closing my eyes, not to sleep but to replay the dream in my mind. I saw his face again, the way he looked at me, the way he handed Rachel to me without saying a word. I could still hear the sound of his voice saying, "Trust me." The words echoed in my head, and I held on to them like a rope in deep water. I didn't know what the next days would bring, but I knew I would keep that dream close to me. It was more than comfort. It was a promise. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I was ready to wait in peace. The morning after the dream started like any other. I woke up early, made coffee, and sat by the window. My phone was face down on the table. I didn't feel the same urge to keep checking it every few minutes. The calm from the night before was still there, steady and unshaken. I didn't expect anything to change so soon, but I also didn't feel the same fear that used to sit heavy on my chest. I told myself I would go through the day normally, keep my mind occupied, and wait for God's timing. I had no idea that his timing was closer than I thought. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it without thinking, expecting another generic update or no real news at all. But when I saw the caller ID, my stomach tightened. It was a number I recognized from the embassy. I answered quickly, my voice unsteady, unsure if this was good or bad news. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "She's out," the person said. I froze, not sure if I heard correctly. "What do you mean she's out?" I asked. "Your sister has been released. She's with medical staff now. She's alive." The words hit me all at once, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My hand covered my mouth as my eyes filled with tears. I stood from the chair without realizing it, pacing in circles, my heart racing. I asked question after question, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The answers were short. Yes, she was safe now. Yes, she was being taken to a hospital. No, they didn't know exactly why they had let her go. I sat down hard, my knees too weak to hold me. My mind went back instantly to the dream. Jesus placing her hand into mine, his eyes steady, his words echoing, "Trust me." It wasn't just a comforting dream. It was a sign. It was a promise, and he had kept it. I closed my eyes for a moment and whispered, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you." My hands were still shaking as I grabbed my jacket and keys. I didn't even think about what I needed to bring. I just knew I had to get to her. The embassy gave me the name of the hospital and the room number. It was still surreal, like I was moving through a film scene I had watched in my mind 100 times but never thought I'd live. When I arrived at the hospital, the sight of her stopped me at the doorway. Rachel was lying on the bed, her skin pale, her body thin and weak. There were 4 lines connected to her arm, and a nurse was adjusting the drip. She turned her head slowly and saw me. Her lips trembled, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then she whispered my name. I walked to her side and held her hand, feeling the bones under her skin. She was alive, but I could see the toll it had taken on her. Her eyes were tired, yet there was a spark in them, a recognition that we were finally in the same place, breathing the same air, without bars or guards between us. The doctor explained that she was severely dehydrated and undernourished. Her body was weak, and she would need weeks of rest and medical care. There were bruises along her arms and shoulders, signs of rough handling, but no major fractures. I listened carefully, nodding, but inside my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about how, less than 24 hours earlier, I had seen her in a dream, torn and weary, and now she was here. The image of Jesus placing her in my hands had been real in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't care about the political reasons behind her release. I didn't care if it made sense to others. I knew exactly what had happened. Over the next few hours, I stayed by her side, watching the color slowly return to her face. The nurses brought food, but it had to be small portions at first. She spoke in short sentences, her voice weak, telling me bits and pieces about the days leading up to her release. She didn't know why it had happened. One moment she was in the same dark room she had been held in for weeks, and the next, guards came in, pulled her to her feet, and let her out. She thought it was a trick at first, but then she was in a vehicle, then at the hospital. "It doesn't make sense," she said softly. "But I'm here." I squeezed her hand and told her, "It makes sense to me." That night, I refused to leave her room. I pulled a chair close to her bed and sat there watching her sleep. Every few minutes, I would glance at her chest, making sure it was rising and falling. My heart still carried the images of her suffering, but now they were overlaid with this reality: she was here, alive, safe. I whispered prayers under my breath, thanking Jesus for keeping his word. I thought about how hopeless I had felt before, how I had prayed for the first time to someone I had never believed in, and how he had answered in a way no one else could. The room was quiet except for the sound of her breathing, and in that stillness, my gratitude kept growing. In the following days, Rachel's strength began to return. She could sit up without help, walk a few steps with support, and speak longer without losing her breath. The hospital staff treated her with kindness, checking her vitals regularly and encouraging her to eat a little more each day. I stayed nearby, running errands for anything she needed and making sure she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The more I watched her recover, the more I understood that what had happened was far beyond luck or coincidence. It was a miracle, plain and simple. And it had come exactly as Jesus had shown me, in his time, in his way. Even when my close-circle journalist friends began asking questions and speculating about the reasons for her sudden release, I didn't engage. I didn't need to explain it to them. The truth was something I carried inside me, something they wouldn't understand without having lived through it. The dream had been the announcement. The release had been the proof. Every time I looked at her now, I saw both the fragile woman who had suffered and the living answer to my prayer. And every time I thought of that, my heart swelled with gratitude so deep it almost hurt. When Rachel was strong enough to leave the hospital, we walked out together. She was still weak, leaning on me for support, but we both knew this was the beginning of a new chapter. For her, it meant recovering from the trauma and rebuilding her strength. For me, it meant facing the promise I had made in the darkest moment of my life. I had told Jesus that if he saved her, I would give him my life. That wasn't just a desperate cry anymore. It was now a vow I had to keep. I thought about it every night as I watched her sleep in the quiet safety of our home. I remembered the dream, the peace that followed, and the miracle that came within hours. I couldn't explain it away or pretend it was chance. This was personal. This was real. And it demanded a response from me. I had grown up in Jewish traditions. I knew the prayers, the holidays, the history. I respected my faith and the heritage of my people. But I had also been taught from childhood that Jesus was not the Messiah, that his claims were not for us. That belief had shaped my whole life. I never questioned it, until now. The miracle I had experienced forced me to ask the questions I had always avoided. If Jesus was not who he said he was, then how did he know my prayer? How did he appear in my dream, speak to me, and then deliver exactly what he promised? The logic I once relied on was breaking apart, and in its place was a growing certainty that I had been wrong about him. It was uncomfortable, but it was also freeing. I didn't have to rely on what I was told anymore. I had seen for myself. The first step I took was private. I started reading the New Testament for the first time in my life. I wanted to know his words, not just what others said about him. At first, it felt strange, like I was trespassing into something forbidden. But as I read, I began to see the man I had met in my dream. The compassion, the strength, the authority in his words, it was all there. Every page felt like confirmation of what I had already experienced. I saw how he healed the sick, how he had mercy on the outcast, and how he gave hope to people who had none. And I couldn't help but see myself in those stories. I was the desperate one calling out for help, and he had stopped to answer me. My faith wasn't built on tradition anymore. It was built on an encounter that changed everything. Telling my family was not easy. Some were relieved Rachel was safe, but they didn't understand why I credited Jesus for her release. They thought I was being emotional or letting my fear cloud my judgment. A few were more direct. They told me I was abandoning my roots. I listened to their concerns, but I knew this wasn't about turning my back on my heritage. It was about stepping into the truth that had revealed itself to me. I explained that my belief in Jesus didn't erase who I was as a Jew. It fulfilled something deep inside me. Still, their reactions were mixed, and I felt the weight of being different in a community where following him was rare. The loneliness was real, but it didn't shake my decision. I had already made my choice. I would follow him no matter what. Daily life began to change in ways I didn't expect. I started each morning with prayer, not out of ritual, but because I wanted to. I spoke to him like I would to a close friend, sharing my fears, my hopes, and my gratitude. Reading the Bible became part of my evenings. I found comfort in his promises, strength in his teachings, and correction when my thoughts drifted back toward doubt. I began to notice how his words shaped the way I treated others, with more patience, more kindness, more understanding. My priorities shifted too. Success, recognition, and even security didn't matter as much as staying close to him. I realized that following Jesus wasn't just about believing something different. It was about living differently. One of the biggest changes was how I saw God. Before, I thought of him as distant, watching from far away, mostly silent unless we got everything right. Now, I saw him as close, present, and deeply involved in my life. I no longer prayed into an empty space. I prayed to a living Savior who had already shown me he listens and responds. This shifted how I handled every challenge. Even when things didn't go smoothly, I didn't feel abandoned. I knew he was still with me, guiding each step, even if I didn't understand the path. That certainty gave me peace I had never known before. I also became more aware of the cost of following him in a culture where it wasn't common. Some people avoided me. Others asked questions I couldn't answer yet. But instead of hiding, I chose to be honest about my journey. I shared my story when the opportunity came, not to argue or convince, but to testify to what I had lived through. I realized I couldn't keep this to myself. If Jesus had saved my sister and transformed my life, how could I stay silent? The same way he had met me in my desperation, he wanted to meet others in theirs. That became my mission, to point people to him, even if they didn't believe right away. Rachel noticed the change in me before I said anything. She told me one evening that I seemed lighter, calmer, like I was carrying less weight. I told her about my promise and how I intended to keep it. She didn't fully understand, but she didn't argue. She had seen the dream's fulfillment with her own eyes, and she knew something powerful had happened. Her own recovery was slow, and we spent many hours talking about life, faith, and what mattered most. I didn't push her to believe what I believed, but I prayed silently that one day she would experience him as I had. As weeks turned into months, I began connecting with a small group of believers who met quietly in homes. Some were Jews like me, others from different backgrounds. We prayed together, studied the Bible, and encouraged one another. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking this path alone. These were people who understood the risk of following Jesus in a culture where it wasn't widely accepted, yet they were committed to him anyway. Their faith inspired me to stand firm, even when doubts or pressure tried to pull me back. Now, when I look back on everything that happened, I see a clear thread, from my despair and hopelessness, to the moment I prayed for the first time, to the dream, to Rachel's release, and to the transformation of my life. It wasn't random. It wasn't luck. It was Jesus. He had been there all along, waiting for me to call on him. And when I did, he answered in a way that left no room for doubt. That is why I follow him now, why I trust him with everything, and why I will spend the rest of my life sharing his love. I know the road ahead won't always be easy. There will be opposition, misunderstanding, and moments where my old fears try to return. But I also know the one who brought my sister back when all hope was gone. I have seen his power to save not just in my life, but in hers. And I have promised to never turn away from him again. Whatever the cost, I will live for him. Because once you have seen what he can do, you can never go back to life without him. He is my Savior, my Lord, and my closest friend, and I will follow him even to the end. My name is David. I am a Jew born and raised in the land of Israel. I have walked the streets of Jerusalem, prayed at the Western Wall, celebrated the feasts, and lived under the teachings of our fathers. I have loved my heritage with all my heart. I have defended it in words and in life. But now I speak with a heavy burden. My voice is not for strangers. My words are for my own people, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who share the same blood, history, and covenant promises that I do. I speak not to argue or condemn, but to plead. I plead because I have seen what I never thought possible. I have met the one we have long refused to see. I have met Yeshua, Jesus, and I know beyond doubt that he is the Messiah we have been waiting for. I know why we have resisted him. Since childhood, we have been told that Jesus was for the Christians, not for the Jews. We were taught he broke our law, that he claimed what he had no right to claim, and that he led our people away from the Torah. We saw the history of persecution done in his name and thought, how could he be ours? We told ourselves the Messiah would come as a mighty king, overthrowing our enemies, restoring the kingdom of Israel in power and glory. We never imagined he would come as a servant, riding on a donkey, laying down his life instead of taking up a sword. But our own prophet said this is how he would come. Isaiah spoke of a suffering servant, pierced for our transgressions. David wrote of the one whose hands and feet would be pierced. Zechariah told us we would one day look upon him whom we pierced and mourn. These are not the writings of Christians. These are the words of our own scriptures. I resisted him for years because I could not imagine calling a man Son of God. In our prayers we declare the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. How could there be another? But I did not understand then what I see now, that the Father and the Son are not two gods, but one. The Son is the Word made flesh, as the prophets described the Word coming forth from God to accomplish His will. He is the image of the invisible God, the fullness of God dwelling in human form. When He walked among us, He did not come to destroy the law but to fulfill it. Everything in the Torah, the sacrifices, the feasts, the priesthood, all pointed to Him. He is our Passover lamb, our atonement on Yom Kippur, our high priest who never dies. My people, I did not believe this because someone preached it to me. I believed it because I called on Him in my darkest hour, and He answered. I prayed to Yeshua when no rabbi could help me. I prayed when our government turned away and when my sister's life was hanging by a thread in the hands of her captors. I said to Him, if you are real, save her, and I will follow you all my life. He did not answer with a debate or a sermon. He answered with power. He came to me in a dream so vivid I can still feel it. He dragged me forward, and I saw Him hand my sister over to me. Within 24 hours, she was freed. No explanation, no political deal, no human intervention. She came home alive when by all reasons she should have died. This is why I plead with you. We have prayed for centuries for God to show His face. In Yeshua He has. We have asked for the Messiah to come. He already has. He came, He died for our sins, He rose again on the third day, and He offers forgiveness and eternal life to all who will believe, Jew and Gentile alike. The covenant God made with our fathers is not broken. It is fulfilled in Him. We do not lose our identity by following Him. We find its true purpose. We become part of the remnant of Israel who recognizes her King. I know the fear you feel. I know the cost of even speaking His name in some of our circles. I have felt the suspicion, the quiet rejection, the raised eyebrows when I talk about Yeshua. But what are we afraid of? If He is not the Messiah, then nothing I say matters. But if He is, then every moment we delay in turning to Him is a moment wasted. The prophets told us there would be a day when our eyes would be opened. I believe that day is now. We cannot wait for a safer time. We cannot wait until the world approves. Salvation is here. His name is Yeshua. My brothers and sisters, I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to seek Him for yourself. Pray to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and ask Him plainly, if Yeshua is the Messiah, show me. Do not be afraid to ask. He will answer. He may speak through His word, through a dream, through the witness of someone you trust, or through an undeniable event in your life. I am living proof that He hears. I am proof that He saves. I am proof that He is alive. I was a Jew who did not believe, and now I am a Jew who follows the Messiah of Israel. And I have never been more certain of the truth. If you hear my words today and feel something stirring in your heart, do not push it away. That is not me. That is the Spirit of God drawing you to His Son. Remember what our prophet said, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. We have rejected Him for too long. It is time to build on Him. It is time to let Him be our foundation, our hope, our salvation. I speak to you with love, with urgency, and with the deepest respect for our shared history. I know what it means to be Jewish. I know what it means to carry the weight of our people's story. But I also know that our story is not complete without Yeshua. He is the promised one. He is the King who will return to Jerusalem and reign in righteousness. He is the one who will wipe away every tear from our eyes. I will follow Him until my last breath. And my prayer is that you will too.